Right now, think about the last time you actually felt hungry. Not the habitual hunger of mealtime arriving on schedule. Not the social hunger of sitting down because everyone else is eating. The real physical sensation, an empty stomach, a slight hollowness, the unmistakable signal that your body genuinely needs fuel. Can you remember it clearly? Or has it become difficult to locate, buried under a sensation that has become your default state, a stomach that feels persistently, naggingly full, regardless of how little you have actually eaten that day, regardless of how many hours have passed since your last meal? You eat breakfast. By mid-morning, you should, by every biological expectation, feel some return of hunger. Instead, there is a heaviness, a fullness that sits there, unmoving, as though breakfast never left. Lunch arrives more out of habit and social timing than out of any genuine physical need, and you eat a smaller portion than you used to because eating more produces an uncomfortable pressure that you have started to call indigestion. By evening, the idea of dinner feels almost unwelcome. You eat because you know you should, because skipping meals concerns you, because someone has told you that adequate nutrition matters as you age. But the hunger that should accompany the end of a long day, the hunger that used to make dinner the most satisfying meal, has been absent for longer than you can clearly remember. You have probably explained this to yourself one of two ways. Either you have decided you are simply eating too much, that your stomach has expanded from years of overconsumption and is now perpetually distended, and you have responded with increasingly restrictive eating that has not actually relieved the fullness. Or you have decided this is simply what happens to digestion after 60 days, a slower system, a body that needs less, a natural and expected reduction in appetite that comes with age and should be accepted rather than questioned. Both of those explanations are wrong, and both of them are preventing you from understanding what is actually happening inside your stomach right now. A malfunction that has nothing to do with how much you eat and nothing to do with the simple passage of years. It has to do with a hormone, a specific identifiable hormone that your stomach produces that is supposed to surge predictably before meals and fall predictably after them, creating the rhythm of hunger and fullness that governed your entire relationship with food for most of your life. A rhythm that, after 60, breaks down in a way that produces exactly the symptom you have been living with. A stomach that never quite empties, a fullness with no edges, a hunger signal that has gone, for all practical purposes, silent. I'm going to show you exactly what this hormone is, what it is supposed to do, and the specific mechanism by which its signaling becomes glitched after 60 days, producing chronic, persistent fullness regardless of how little you have eaten. I am going to explain why this is not simply appetite naturally declining with age, but an active malfunction with real consequences for your nutrition, your muscle mass, and your long-term health. And I am going to give you a protocol that restores the signal, not by forcing yourself to eat more through willpower, but by repairing the mechanism that should be telling your brain accurately when your stomach is actually empty. Stay through the entire video, because what I explain about the connection between this hormone glitch and unintentional weight loss in people over 60, a connection that explains why so many people in this decade are losing weight they did not intend to lose despite feeling like they have no appetite to control, is the piece that makes this issue more urgent than most people over 60 currently understand it to be. Subscribe to Dr. Huang right now. This channel exists to find the actual mechanism behind symptoms that get dismissed as simply part of getting older. Hit subscribe and let us continue. Let me describe what has likely been happening to your relationship with food. There was a time when hunger was a reliable, predictable companion. It arrived roughly on schedule, 3 or 4 hours after your last meal. It had a specific physical quality, an emptiness, sometimes accompanied by a slight rumbling, a clear and unambiguous signal that distinguished itself easily from any other sensation in your body. You responded to it by eating, and eating relieved it completely and satisfyingly until the cycle repeated itself several hours later. Somewhere in your 50s or 60s, that cycle began to change. Not suddenly, gradually, the way most physiological shifts happen, so slowly that no single day marked the transition. The hunger signal became quieter, less distinct, harder to locate amid a general background sensation of fullness that seemed to persist regardless of timing. You may have noticed that you can go an entire morning without any hunger signal at all, only eating lunch because the clock told you to. You may have noticed that a meal, which used to satisfy you for 3 or 4 hours, now leaves you feeling full for 6, 7, 8 hours. Well past the point where your body should genuinely need more fuel, but also well past the point where any hunger has emerged to signal the need. You may have noticed, more concerning, that your weight has been slowly declining despite no deliberate effort to lose it. Clothes fitting more loosely, a number on the scale that has been drifting downward over the past 1 to 2 years, not dramatically, but consistently, in a direction that should concern you if you understood what it actually represents. Here is what is happening, and why it is not simply your body needing less as you age. Your stomach produces a hormone called ghrelin. You may have heard of it described as the hunger hormone, and that description, while simplified, is largely accurate. Ghrelin is produced primarily by specialized cells in the lining of your stomach, and its job is precise and essential. As your stomach empties following a meal, ghrelin production rises. It rises predictably, reaching a peak shortly before your next anticipated mealtime, and that rising ghrelin level is what travels through your bloodstream to your brain, specifically to the hypothalamus, where it activates the neural circuits responsible for the conscious experience of hunger. This is not a passive background process. Ghrelin is an active, deliberate signal, your stomach communicating directly with your brain, saying specifically and clearly, this organ is empty, it requires fuel, initiate the behaviors necessary to obtain it. When you eat, ghrelin levels fall rapidly, and a different set of hormones, including one called peptide YY and another called cholecystokinin, released from your intestines in response to the arriving food, rise to produce the sensation of fullness and satisfaction that tells your brain to stop eating. In a properly functioning system, these hormones operate in a clean, alternating rhythm. Ghrelin rises, you eat, ghrelin falls, and fullness hormones rise. The meal ends, several hours pass, ghrelin rises again, and the cycle repeats. This rhythm is what most people experience for the majority of their adult lives without ever thinking about the hormones producing it. After 60, this rhythm breaks down through a specific and identifiable mechanism, and I want you to understand exactly what happens, because the mechanism explains every detail of what you have been experiencing. The cells in your stomach lining that produce ghrelin are concentrated primarily in a region called the fundus, the upper portion of the stomach. These cells require adequate blood flow, a healthy stomach lining environment, and, critically, adequate stomach acid to function correctly. This is the same stomach acid decline I have described in previous videos, the same hypochlorhydria that affects the majority of people over 60 and undermines processes throughout the digestive system. But its effect on ghrelin specifically has almost never been explained clearly to the people experiencing it. Stomach acid does more than digest food. It maintains the specific pH environment in which the ghrelin-producing cells operate optimally. As stomach acid production declines after 60, the pH environment in the fundus shifts, and the ghrelin-producing cells become progressively less responsive to the normal triggers that should stimulate their hormone release as the stomach empties. The result is a blunted ghrelin curve. Instead of rising sharply and predictably as your stomach empties, ghrelin rises slowly, weakly, and at a lower overall peak than it should. Your stomach may be genuinely, completely empty, but the hormonal signal that should be telling your brain this fact is not being generated with sufficient strength to register as the clear, recognizable hunger you used to experience. This is the first half of the mechanism. The second half involves the opposite side of the equation. What is happening to the fullness hormones and why they are not falling appropriately even hours after a meal has been fully digested. The fullness hormones, particularly cholecystokinin, are released by your small intestine in response to the arrival of fat and protein from your meal. Their job is to signal satisfaction and the cessation of eating during and shortly after a meal. In a healthy system, cholecystokinin levels rise during eating and fall back to baseline within roughly 1 to 2 hours as digestion proceeds and the meal moves through the small intestine. After 60, two changes affect this side of the system. First, the same reduced stomach acid that blunts ghrelin also slows gastric emptying, the rate at which food moves from your stomach into your small intestine. Slower gastric emptying, called gastroparesis when significant, means that food sits in the stomach for an extended period, continuing to trigger stretch receptors in the stomach wall that contribute to the sensation of fullness long after a meal that should have already moved on. Second, the small intestine's sensitivity to cholecystokinin itself changes with age in a way that has been documented in gastroenterology research. Specifically, an increased sensitivity to the same circulating levels of cholecystokinin, meaning that even normal post-meal hormone levels produce a more prolonged and more intense sensation of fullness than they would have at a younger age. Put these two mechanisms together and you have the complete picture. Your ghrelin signal, the hormone that should be telling you that you are empty and need to eat, has become blunted and unreliable. Your fullness signal, the hormone that should fall away within an hour or two after eating, is staying elevated longer and producing a more exaggerated sensation than it should. The result is a stomach that genuinely, biologically feels persistently full, regardless of how empty it actually is, while the signal that should be correcting this misperception has lost its voice. This is not your stomach being overfull from overeating. This is a hormonal miscommunication between an organ and a brain that used to understand each other perfectly and have, after 60, begun speaking a language neither one fully comprehends anymore. And here is why this matters far beyond simple discomfort. When hunger signaling becomes chronically blunted, people eat less, not through deliberate restriction, but through the simple absence of the signal that used to prompt eating. Over months and years, this produces a slow, progressive reduction in caloric intake that the person experiencing it often does not consciously notice because it does not feel like restriction. It feels like simply not being hungry. This chronic underconsumption, sustained over years, is one of the significant contributors to the unintentional weight loss and the progressive muscle loss, called sarcopenia, that affects a substantial proportion of people over 70. The muscle loss accelerates frailty, increases fall risk, and reduces the body's resilience against illness and injury, not because the person chose to eat less, but because a hormone glitch silenced the signal that should have told them their body still needed adequate fuel. Let me tell you about someone I will call Eleanor. Though again, this is a different woman than any I have described previously, her story representative of a pattern I have observed repeatedly in this specific age group. 68 years old, former piano teacher, a woman of careful habits who had maintained a healthy, stable weight for most of her adult life through what she described as simply eating when hungry and stopping when full. A relationship with food that had never required conscious management because her hunger and fullness signals had always communicated clearly. Over the preceding 18 months, she had lost 12 pounds without any deliberate effort. She described her appetite as essentially absent. Breakfast left her feeling full until early afternoon. She had largely stopped eating lunch, not from any decision to do so, but because the idea of a midday meal simply never occurred to her as something her body wanted. Dinner had become smaller, eaten more from social and nutritional obligation than from any internal drive. She had seen her primary care doctor, who had ordered standard blood work, complete blood count, metabolic panel, thyroid function, all of which had returned within normal limits. She had been reassured that the weight loss, while worth monitoring, did not indicate any acute concerning pathology, and was told that appetite naturally declines with age. She came to me specifically because the explanation that appetite simply declines with age did not match her own internal experience. She described not an absence of interest in food, but a specific, persistent physical sensation of fullness that never seemed to resolve. A feeling she found difficult to articulate to her doctor in a way that distinguished it from simple lack of appetite, because to her, they felt different, even if she could not explain precisely how. When I asked her to describe the sensation specifically, she said it felt like a heaviness, a pressure sitting in her upper abdomen that was present almost constantly, regardless of how recently or how little she had eaten. She had assumed this was simply what a fuller, older stomach felt like. We discussed the ghrelin and gastric emptying mechanism, and she recognized immediately the connection to symptoms she had not previously known how to categorize: the slow gastric emptying explaining the prolonged, disconnected fullness, the blunted ghrelin explaining the absence of any genuine hunger signal to counterbalance it. We tested her gastric emptying time using a standard nuclear medicine study that measures how long it takes a test meal to leave the stomach. Her emptying time was significantly delayed compared to expected norms for her age. confirming that food was indeed sitting in her stomach for an extended period, continuously triggering the fullness sensation she had been experiencing. We implemented the protocol I am about to describe, focused on restoring the ghrelin signal and improving gastric emptying time, rather than attempting to force increased food intake through willpower alone, which she had already tried unsuccessfully and which had only produced uncomfortable bloating without resolving the underlying signaling problem. At 6 weeks, Eleanor reported that for the first time in over a year, she had experienced a clear, unmistakable hunger sensation before lunch, something she described, almost emotionally, as recognizing an old friend she had not realized she missed. At 12 weeks, her weight had stabilized and begun a slow, appropriate recovery. At 16 weeks, her gastric emptying time, retested, had improved significantly toward normal range. She had not forced herself to eat more through discipline. She had restored the biological signaling that told her accurately when eating was needed, and once that signal returned, the eating followed naturally, the way it had for most of her life before the hormone glitch began. Here is the protocol. Every element is targeted at restoring ghrelin signaling and improving gastric emptying time, the two mechanisms driving the chronic fullness sensation. The pre-meal acid priming sequence. 15 to 20 minutes before each meal, drink 150 milliliters of warm water with 1 teaspoon of raw apple cider vinegar. This partially restores the acidic environment in the stomach that the ghrelin-producing cells require to function optimally, and it does so specifically in the pre-meal window when ghrelin signaling should naturally be approaching its peak. Done consistently before every meal, this begins to restore the responsiveness of the fundus cells over a period of several weeks, allowing them to produce a clearer, stronger ghrelin signal as your stomach empties between meals. Bitter foods before meals. A small amount of bitter greens, arugula, radicchio, dandelion greens, a few leaves eaten plain, 5 to 10 minutes before a meal, stimulate what is called the cephalic phase of digestion through bitter taste receptors specifically. This cephalic phase response includes increased stomach acid secretion and improved gastric motility, both of which directly support the ghrelin and gastric emptying mechanisms we have discussed. This is an old practice common in many traditional food cultures, specifically as an appetite stimulant before meals, and the biological mechanism behind why it works has only been clearly mapped in research over recent decades. The gastric emptying support protocol, walking for 10 to 15 minutes after every meal, not as a calorie-burning exercise, but specifically as a gastric motility intervention. Physical movement, even gentle walking, stimulates the migrating motor complex, the wave-like muscular contractions that move food through your digestive tract. For people with delayed gastric emptying, post-meal walking has been shown in clinical research to meaningfully accelerate the rate at which the stomach empties, directly reducing the duration of the prolonged fullness sensation that comes from food sitting in the stomach longer than it should. Smaller, more frequent meals rather than 3 large meals. This may seem counterintuitive when the goal is to restore hunger signaling, but for someone with delayed gastric emptying, large meals compound the problem by overwhelming an already slow system, producing more prolonged fullness that further suppresses the next ghrelin surge. 5 smaller meals spread across the day, rather than 3 large ones, allows the stomach to empty more completely between eating occasions, giving the ghrelin signal a genuine opportunity to rise before the next meal arrives. Ginger, consumed regularly, has specific, well-documented effects on gastric emptying. A cup of fresh ginger tea, made from grated ginger root steeped in hot water for 10 minutes, consumed 20 minutes before your largest meal of the day, has been shown in clinical research to measurably accelerate gastric emptying time. This is not a generalized digestive folk remedy. The prokinetic effect of ginger on stomach motility has specific mechanistic research behind it, involving ginger's effect on motilin, another digestive hormone that works alongside the ghrelin and cholecystokinin system to coordinate stomach emptying. The protein-first eating sequence. When you do eat, consume the protein portion of your meal first, before vegetables and before any starches. Protein has the strongest stimulating effect on cholecystokinin among all macronutrients, but consumed first, while the stomach is at its emptiest. It produces a cleaner, more time-limited fullness signal rather than the prolonged elevation that comes from a large, mixed meal where digestion of different components is staggered and overlapping. This sequencing helps the fullness signal rise and fall more predictably, supporting the restoration of the overall hunger and satiety rhythm. 2 supplements worth specific consideration given the mechanisms involved. Zinc carnosine, 75 milligrams twice daily, has research specifically supporting its role in supporting the health of the stomach lining and the function of the cells within it, including the ghrelin-producing cells of the fundus. Zinc deficiency, common after 60 due to the same absorption issues discussed in previous videos, can directly impair the stomach's hormone-producing capacity. Digestive bitters, available as a liquid tincture from most health food retailers, taken as a few drops in water before meals, provide a more concentrated and convenient version of the bitter food stimulation described above for those who find consuming raw bitter greens before every meal impractical. What to expect and when? The acid priming sequence and bitter foods typically produce the earliest noticeable change, often within 2 to 3 weeks, as the more immediate stimulation of stomach acid secretion and the cephalic phase response begin to restore a more functional pre-meal environment. The gastric emptying improvements from regular post-meal walking and ginger tea tend to show meaningful cumulative effect over 4 to 6 weeks, as the migrating motor complex and overall gastric motility gradually improve with consistent stimulation. The return of genuine, recognizable hunger sensation, the marker that matters most, the one Eleanor described as recognizing an old friend, typically emerges somewhere in this same 4 to 8 week window for most people who apply the protocol consistently, as both halves of the mechanism, the ghrelin signal and the gastric emptying rate, improve together. If you have experienced unintentional weight loss alongside this chronic fullness sensation, and that weight loss exceeds 5% of your body weight over a period of 6 to 12 months, this combination warrants a conversation with your doctor about gastric emptying testing specifically, regardless of how this protocol progresses, simply because the degree of weight loss involved deserves direct clinical evaluation alongside the steps you are taking at home. 5 steps, starting today. Before your next meal, 15 to 20 minutes ahead of time, drink 150 milliliters of warm water with 1 teaspoon of raw apple cider vinegar. Begin this before every meal from today forward. Today, if possible, eat a small handful of a bitter green arugula or radicchio are the most widely available. 5 to 10 minutes before your next meal. This begins the cephalic phase stimulation that supports your stomach's natural acid and motility response. After your next meal, walk for 10 to 15 minutes. Not vigorous exercise, a gentle walk around your home, your yard, or your neighborhood. This is the single most direct intervention for the delayed gastric emptying component of the mechanism. Tomorrow, restructure your eating into 5 smaller meals or substantial snacks rather than 3 large ones, giving your stomach genuine opportunities to empty between eating occasions and allowing the ghrelin signal the space it needs to rise. This week, buy fresh ginger root and prepare a cup of ginger tea 20 minutes before your largest meal of the day. Continue this daily alongside the other elements of the protocol. How old are you? Write your age in the comments right now. I ask because the rate of stomach acid decline affecting ghrelin cell function, the typical degree of gastric emptying delay by decade, and the specific patterns of unintentional weight loss in this age group all differ meaningfully between 62 and 78. Your age tells me what this channel needs to address next, and tell me this: has your weight changed without deliberate effort over the past year or two in either direction? Write the approximate number of pounds and whether it was gained or lost in the comments. I want to understand how widely this hormone glitch is affecting unintentional weight changes in this audience, because the answer will shape what this channel covers next on the topic of metabolic and digestive hormone changes after 60. If someone you love has been eating less, not through any deliberate choice, simply because hunger seems to have quietly disappeared from their life and has been told this is just appetite naturally declining with age, send them this video. Their stomach has not lost interest in food. Their body has not stopped needing fuel. A hormone that used to speak clearly has gone quiet, and a different hormone that used to know when to stop talking has not been told to be silent. The fullness they feel is real. It is not in their mind, and it is not the result of overeating. It is the result of a signaling system that can be restored. 1 warm glass of water, one bitter green, one short walk after dinner at a time.